Hello and welcome! It is Vintage Super League time once again. Been waiting a while to say that one. I'm very excited to be here, very excited to be back to Vintage, and very excited to have Reed Duke here with me. Welcome, Reed.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here too. I'm excited to finally be a part of Vintage Super League. I've been watching a long time and it seems like just the most fun anybody can have pretty much.
I'm not going to disagree with you. It is certainly has been a lot of fun. So, big picture, if you haven't been with us before, Vintage Super League, we've got 10 guys. We've done 3 seasons with the same sort of core group of guys. But the way Vintage Super League works, so we can actually show you guys the crew that has been back for, season 1, season 2. But if you finish last in Vintage Super League, you don't get invited back for the next season. Here is the 9 of us that survived Season 2. And then we didn't do any relegation for the little Season 3 mini-season we have. But here's 9 people. But we need a new 10th player. David Williams was unfortunately relegated at the end of Season 2. And we got to figure out who's going to join us in 3 weeks when we start the regular season of Vintage Super League. So here we are with the play-in tournament. We've got 8 awesome players, and I feel like the league can't possibly lose. Whatever happens in this play-in tournament, we're going to have an awesome new 10th player. And Reed, you are, of course, one of the 8 competitors here.
Yeah, I mean the 9 guys we're looking at, that's an intimidating lineup, but whoever wins this 8-player last chance tournament is going to have a tough road and they'll earn their slot,
Yeah,
I'm hoping it's me.
completely agree with that. Hoping it's you. We can look at the bracket. So we're going to take 3 weeks to resolve this play-in tournament. Basically, we could have done single elim in 1 week, but we wanted everybody to feel like, okay, you have a loss to give. Everybody gets to keep playing until they've lost twice, and then this bracket may look complicated, but it's just a double elimination bracket. You see the 5 matches in red there are the ones we're going to play tonight. So everybody will play once, and then the winner of the top 2 matches will actually go ahead and play their second round game, if you will. Next week, we'll come back with 5 more matches, and then 2 weeks from tonight is when we will boil it all down to one final winner.
Yeah, so this looks familiar. It looks like the modern Super League structure that I played in about 2 months back.
That is exactly correct. It is the same double elim structure we did for modern Super League. It's also what we did for the VSL mini season, that season 3 that I won.
Cool. So no surprises here.
Shouldn't be. I think it's pretty straightforward from a bracket point of view anyway. The real question is, okay, what's going to happen with the Magic now that we get to all feel the power coursing through our veins with Vintage once again? I mean, you've got a match up against Gerard here. I know that I look at your Storm deck. Gerard doesn't seem like he's got the most awesome matchup in that sort of 4-color control with no mental missteps up against your Storm deck. Am I reading that right? You feel okay about tonight?
Yeah, I mean, traditional knowledge is that this is the matchup the Storm deck wants. Like, kind of the slower your opponent is, the better the Storm deck's going to be. Like, Mana Drain is a card that you're well prepared to play through. Mental Misstep and Flusterstorm and Pyroblast and those 1-mana cards are a little tougher, and the tools that Workshop bring to the table is a whole nother ballgame. But Mana Drain and Force of Will, those are the cards that the Storm deck's been beating for a decade. It's the cards that you're well prepared for and that you're used to.
Yeah, and you talk about playing this deck for a decade. This is your Vintage deck, right? This Stormless, as I understand it, you played a ton of Vintage, like what, 8-10 years ago at the local shop?
Yeah, and it's funny, I feel like things have kind of come full circle because all the knowledge, my knowledge base from Vintage comes from all the guys that are in this tournament series. Like I specifically originally copied my Storm list from a Stephen Menendian article. At the time it was called Grim Long.
Sure.
The Grim Tutors have since kind of been replaced and stuff, but the main strategy, the structure of the deck is still in place from that many years ago. Yeah.
And then so you played that a bunch at the local store level, and I know you've made it to Eternal Weekend, a couple years of the last several. Basically playing, dust off the Vintage deck that you've been playing forever and take it out for another spin.
Yeah, exactly. As somebody on the pro circuit, there's not a ton of opportunities to play Vintage, but I love, I relish the opportunity when I get it, because what you said earlier about the power coursing through your fingers, and that's part of the reason that I choose Storm also is I figure if I'm only going to get to play Vintage once in a while, I got to use all the restricted cards. You know, I got to get the full feel of the format. You know.
Yeah, I was really struck by a Walk the Plains. They went to Eternal Weekend when you top eighted. What was it, 3 years ago, I guess? And the Walking the Plains guys were there. And they do their little, the top eight interview, and everybody says what they're playing. You just look into the camera, you're like, I play all the most powerful spells in the format, or all the most powerful spells in the multiverse, whatever it was. You just kind of nailed that take, and it was, yeah, that's how Storm works. You get to play with everything.
Yeah, I mean, you just put a bunch of really unfair cards together, and it doesn't really, you don't need to have a game plan. You just look at your opening hand, you're like, wow, I've got all this stuff. I'll find a way to win. So that's what I'm hoping is going to happen this week.
Do you need to fade the matchups against those two workshop decks, or do
No,
you feel
I'm
like
glad you asked, Randy. One of my number one it's going to fill me with pride if I can achieve this goal is that I want to show. I want to disprove the theory that Storm loses to Workshop. I want to show that a well-prepared Storm player just has a fine chance of beating Workshop. I mean, naturally, it's a tough matchup. It's very die roll dependent, but I feel fine. I mean, I'm looking forward to playing against the two Workshop players.
Wow. All right. Now I'm rooting for that to happen. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we talk about vintage, and you say as somebody on the pro circuit, there's not necessarily a ton of opportunities to get vintage, but I know that as trying to put this vintage Super League season together, it's really struck me how there is this Eternal community that really loves to sort of rally around their formats and Eternal Weekend and Vintage Super League. And I really want to say thank you to everybody out there that helped support us. I know that we put a Patreon campaign up to try to make sure that, we could have at least enough money to keep the league going. And I definitely want to say major thank you to our new sponsor. Puka Trade stepped in and, sponsored the whole league. They are the reason we're going to be able to keep doing this now. And so I definitely want to say hats off to Puka Trade. And honestly, it's not just, oh, hey, they're the sponsor. I started using the website once we started talking about sponsors. I wanted to make sure kind of I knew what they were up to, and that we were being sponsored by a company that actually did something good. And okay, here's the short version. I now have these nice shiny Scalding Tarn Expedition showed up in the mail for me this week. It's
all right.
I think the third expedition I've managed to get someone to send to me. I went on Puka Trade, and I've got most of the cards I need to play decks, but the coverage team at GPs has actually started playing Canadian Highlander, and it's it's kind of an opportunity to show off all the random assorted promos that I've accumulated over the years. So went to the basement, and I was like, because I have all these cards from the 90s that I was the guy who would build the decks for the team back in the 90s. So I have, extra copies of some of these cards. They had no idea how valuable Gaia's Cradle had gotten. So I'm like, okay, I could send somebody a Gaia's Cradle because it's the fifth one. I don't really need to hold on to 5. And then turn that card into other cards like that I could show off in my decks. Like, I don't know. I decided I wanted to have Expeditions in my Canadian Highlander deck, and now I do. Anyway.
So I'd love to add, Randy, anytime I've had the opportunity to dip my toes into the vintage community, so to speak, I've just had a great experience. The people are great. They're friendly, they're honest, they're welcoming, they're passionate, and just everybody loves to have fun. So I'm really impressed every time with the vintage community, and I'll echo your statements. Just thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to everybody who made this possible, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, the first match that we're going to be looking to, we can maybe, if we get a chance to put the bracket up, that might be nice. We've got queued up for you Hall of Famer Ula Rade and longtime vintage fan and player David Ochoa. So that A3 match, that's going to be the first one we start with. You're going to wind up playing the winner of this. Have you spent much time looking at their deck lists, or are you mostly been studying what Gerard's bringing to the table?
I took a pretty close look at what everybody brought, and this looks like we're just going to have a classic pure vintage match, right, between Workshop and a blue. So Uli Rade's deck is a Grixis Pyromancer deck. He does not have Delver of Secrets, though, right?
He does not have Delver. Essentially, if you imagine a Delver list in just blue-red and then replace the Delvers with Cabal Therapy, you get pretty close to what he's got. And the interaction between Gitaxian Probe, which you want to play anyway in your Young Pyromancer deck, and Cabal Therapy is awesome. This is actually very similar to the list I used to win Vintage Super League Season 3, basically because I copied Ula's list. Ula put this thing together because he was grinding on Magic Online, and he and Magnus Lanto both played it at the Magic Online Championships. It was at like 6 months ago, which Magnus wound up winning. And I thought their vintage deck looked awesome, so I ran it in VSL Season 3, and now here it's come full circle. Ula is here, and yeah, running.
I'll say this: I love his approach to deck building. Every time I've looked at a list that he was part of, building or tuning, I've been really impressed. It seems like he just kind of knows what he wants to be doing. He knows what his game plan is and what the cards that he wants to see are, and he streamlines for that. And you'll see that with this deck, leaning really heavily on the young pyromancers to actually win the game. But I guess that he just decided young pyromancer's the best. I'm not going to mess around with these 3/2 creatures. I'm just going to put a young pyromancer into play, and my whole deck is devoted to achieving that goal and then winning from that position.
You see a couple of updates to the list, though. Jace Vryn's Prodigy is obviously new and a new addition here. There's actually more copies of Jace Vryn's Prodigy in these 8 decks than there are copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor.
That's impressive. That's a good fact. I never would have expected that.
Yeah, he's up 5-3. Still see both in multiple decks, but pretty interesting. Also, by the way, can we take a moment to appreciate main deck Chasm Skulker?
Yeah, vintage is slow to change. A lot of the cards have been around for decades, but when you see a card from M15 or something, M14, just hanging out in a main deck in a super competitive vintage deck, you gotta love it.
Yeah. So that's Ula's list. Blue-red, kind of pyromancery, but with the black splash for Cabal Therapy in particular, but he also gets a Demonic Tutor out of that. The opponent, David Ochoa, has shown up with Workshops. So this is, I think, the way Workshop decks look now. Chalice of the Void has been restricted, and so there's only the one Chalice of the Void in this list now. That's got to take a little bit of the teeth out of the Workshop decks, which, in my opinion, had gotten a little bit oppressive before that restriction. But the deck is still viable, and I think there's 2 Workshops, and they've both gone with this sort of Arcbound Ravager, Triskelion, creature-heavy, sort of fire and ice flavoring.
So David has Tangle Wires, and he does not have Sphere of Resistance. Is that the more common way, would you say, to build it?
I mean, I don't know if we have a common way to build it in this sort of post-Chalice restricted world. You make a good point, though. Nick Detweiler, who's the other Shops player this time around, somehow it's not Roland Chang on Shops, which is also interesting. So Nick was also on, Arcbound, Hangerback, Triskelion, and Sword, but he actually does have Sphere.
Yeah, he has, I believe, 3 Sphere of Resistance. So
what does Ochoa have instead of the Spheres? I guess he's up to.
Well, I'm not sure if Nick has Tangle Wires. Does he?
Yeah, he does. He's got 4 Tangle Wires.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's just more creatures then.
Yeah, it's 2 creatures, and I guess, I think it's the Jitte. Yeah, he's got 2 extra creatures and a Jitte from where Nick is. But I did find, like I said, I found it interesting that the 2 Workshop decks were, other than this, I guess you would notice the Sphere of Resistance. That totally makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's the first.
I didn't pick up on it at first. I was looking at the similarities. You're like, how many spheres do I have to fight my way through? And it's Ochoa that's on your side of the bracket. So should you win and David win, you guys get paired. I guess that's the better of the 2 Shops decks from your perspective.
Yeah, he's got a cool sideboard card in Witchbane Orb, which you wouldn't really think of as a disruptive card against a combo deck, but it does stop Hurkyl's Recall. I mean, Hurkyl's Recall says target player bounces all their artifacts.
Yeah. No, Hurkyl's has always been my favorite plan in this matchup as well, right?
Yeah.
If you stall long enough, you get off one good end step, Hurkyl's untap, combo out, and win the game.
But hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That's multiple match results away from happening.
Who's your pick here between Ula and David?
Could we take a look at Ula's list one more time? I want to see exactly what's how well prepared he is with the sideboard. So it looks like he has the full 4 Ingot Chewers.
Yep.
He's got some extra lands in his sideboard.
Wow, he's got 5 lands in his sideboard.
Yeah.
That is a lot of land. Like, the version of this that I played had Pulverize in the sideboard, which actually made me feel like I was advantaged in the Workshop matchup, but then they printed an Arcbound Ravager. Hangerback Walker. And you can't really play Pulverize in a world where the Shops decks are all on Hangerback Walker. I feel like that sideboard tech has gone by the wayside now, and Ula's on a bunch of extra land. Like, he'll bring in Wastelands and Strip Mines so that he's got mana and so that he can destroy a workshop itself.
Well, you asked me what I think of the matchup. I guess my hedge my bets cop out answer is that it's going to favor David in game one at least, and it's going to be very die roll dependent. So, but if you twisted my arm, forced me to pick a player, I think I would pick David. Just if he wins the die roll and gets to have game one and a potential game three on the play, I think that's going to be pretty tough to overcome. This deck's just so fast and explosive.
I really like what you said earlier when we first started talking about the matchup. It is a classic battle.
Yeah,
it is
for sure.
This sort of cheap blue spell deck, the Force of Will deck, but with enough action to come out aggressively versus the Workshop deck, kind of an archetypical battle. I think it's close. I'm gonna pick Ula. I do like. I love that archetype, and I think I've always been a big fan of land in the sideboard. Like being able to bring in 5 extra lands against the deck that's ultimately trying to just that's fundamentally what the Shops deck is trying to do, is just trying to prevent you from being able to cast your spells. And I think those extra lands may be a really good plan from Ula. I haven't seen quite that take on the matchup, but looks good to me on paper.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, we're ready. Let's get down to the first match of the play-in tournament. Welcome back, Vintage.
Wow!
Start trading today at pukatrade.com.